Kaulig Racing is close to announcing their 2024 NASCAR Cup Series plans, and Matt DiBenedetto's future is a little uncertain. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports story discusser today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead and start talking about Bill Elliott. It was reported by Adam Stern on Wednesday evening that Bill Elliott is selling hundreds of acres of his land in Dawsonville, Georgia, to the local township to help preserve it in a nearby watershed with endangered fish from commercial development. Good guy, Bill Elliott. This is why Billy has been the most popular driver for many years, and one of the most respected drivers, not just in the industry. He's, of course, still been involved in the industry to this day. But I think this is really awesome, really great, and glad to see that Bill Elliott is selling this to help out the wildlife. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Miles Rowe. As it was announced on Wednesday early morning that Miles Rowe will be joining Indy NXT in 2024, driving for number 99 for Force Indy with HMD support. Miles Rowe, of course, just picked the USF 2000 Championship, which created a scholarship for him to go to Indy NXT. He, of course, was the first African-American driver to win a major IndyCar or Indy's type of championship. This is a really great opportunity for Miles Rowe. I think Miles Rowe is absolutely going to be a championship threatening contender, and I think he's got potential to win a couple IndyCar championships in his career. This guy's really becoming a legend of the lower series, and I think he will be a championship threat in Indy NXT Series 2024. This is a fantastic and great opportunity, and glad to see that he'll be joining Indy NXT in the 2024 season. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Xfinity technical inspection. Now, this is a story I was going to cover earlier in the week, but there's a pretty big announcement that came out earlier in the week regarding the Xfinity Series. And according to NASCAR, that NASCAR states that due to an abundance of failures in tech inspection the past couple weeks, there will be some new rules in regards to technical inspection. Usually before, if you had 3 failures, you would have a crew member sent home. But it's changing because now if you have 2 failures, a crew member is going to be sent home and will not be able to go into the racetrack starting this weekend at Bristol. A big reason why this is taking place is obviously, like I mentioned a second ago, there have been a lot of failures in technical inspection. I think at Daytona there were 5 or 6 cars that failed inspection, and they had to basically come down through for a pass-through penalty. I think at Darlington there were 5 or 6, and I think at Kansas there were actually 5 or 6 that failed as well. This is very important. I think this is a great decision that Xfinity Series has made. Don't break the rules and you won't get into trouble. People are pushing the brownies. I think they might back off now because the playoffs a lot of these teams that were getting caught are not in the playoffs anymore. So it is what it is. I think this is absolutely the right call. They've made these changes, and this is a new rule coming in when it comes to technical inspection. Honestly, I'm not shocked and surprised about it. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Dmitry Kosko. As it was reported by Mike Straw that Dmitry Kosko has resigned from the Motorsports Games Board of Directors. Honestly, good riddance. Dmitry Kosko is a massive reason. It was behind a lot of the stuff that happened at Motorsports Games, the bad stuff happening at the workplace, and obviously Motorsports Games has a really bad reputation, and Dmitry Kosko's had a really big history of being involved in some really shady businesses, including Motorsports Games. Obviously, it's expected that Motorsports Games is going to lose the NASCAR license in the next 2 weeks, and that's probably going to get announced on September 30th or in early October. Motorsports Games, at least exclusive license, I should say. But when it comes to Dmitry Kosko, honestly, good riddance. This guy has scammed a lot of people. Wasn't, I think, paying his employees. There's a lot of shady stuff that was going on with Dmitry Kosko. So honestly, when it comes to Dmitry Kosko, good riddance, and glad to see that he is no longer working with the company. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the IndyCar race from Laguna Seca. Now, while the NASCAR Cup Series race was going on in Kansas, you had the IndyCar race going on at Laguna Seca. And this is one of the most wildest and craziest IndyCar races I have ever seen. There were a record number of cautions for the track Laguna Seca for IndyCar. I think there were 8 or 9 yells that ended up taking place. And at the end of the day, Scott Dixon came out of nowhere and ended up winning the race. And what's crazy about Scott Dixon's race is he got handed a penalty early for contact from Rinus VeeKay when he got a little loose. And unfortunately, he got handed a drive-through penalty. But there were so many contenders who fell out of contention. Marcus Ericsson, Felix Rosenqvist who crashed. You had Tom Blomqvist crash in this race. You had Alex Palou lose a ton of track position. He had some contact with a couple of people throughout the race. You had Joseph Newgarden spin out. You had Romain Grosjean have to get dropped back. It was one of the craziest and most intense IndyCar races I have ever seen. But Scott Dixon came through and picked up his 3rd win of 2023. If you're looking at someone who could be a championship threat in IndyCar next year, Scott Dixon might have a chance to potentially pick up, I think, his 7th IndyCar championship next year. He might be the championship favorite, as he has won 3 of the last 4 IndyCar races. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Thermal Club. As it was announced yesterday that IndyCar will run an all-star race at the Thermal Club on NBC next March, on March 24th, 2024. This will be for $1 million for the winner, and this will take place after the St. Petersburg Grand Prix. This does not surprise or shock me. Obviously, there was an IndyCar test that took place early in the year in 2023. I think either in early January or late January or early March. There was a test that took place at the Thermal Club. There have been some conversations about potentially having this as a points-paying race. We now know for sure it's going to be an all-star race. And honestly, I think this is really, really cool that they are doing this. And it's going to be something that can be held on during when, of course, because IndyCar kind of has their schedule spread out. And I think it's really cool they're going to be racing the Thermal Club. If I'm not mistaken, Don Cusick, who's kind of an owner in IndyCar, got some clause in the Thermal Club. I think he actually owns the Thermal Club, so he was behind this opportunity. I believe it's going to be 2 heats, and I think 16 drivers are going to run in the main event. I think it's really cool they're doing this. I'm excited about this, and I love the fact that IndyCar is going to be racing at the Thermal Club. I'm excited. I'm pumped, and glad to see that IndyCar will get the opportunity and chance to run at the Thermal Club. I think it's going to be a really exciting and awesome race. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Callum Ilott. It was reported by Christopher Dehart that Callum Ilott will return to Juncos Hollinger Racing in 2024, driving the number 77. While it was reported on the broadcast during an IndyCar race that the contract had not been signed, with how well Callum Ilott had been performing at the IndyCar race at Laguna Seca, I would imagine the contract is probably getting signed as we speak. Callum Ilott has been pretty impressive in his sophomore season. Obviously made the Indy 500 this year, and I think has done a really good job with Juncos Hollinger Racing. Both cars are running up front at Laguna Seca, and I think Callum Ilott is someone who is becoming more and more better as the year has progressed. And I think in 2024, he could take the next step forward. He looks to get more podiums, and at least Juncos Hollinger, who I think has the least funding of anybody, I think both their cars are going to get more funding next year by being part of that leader circle. If you're in the top 22 in the championship, you get money, $1 million extra. I think both cars end up getting that money from the leader circle, so they're going to get a lot more money. But I think it's great that they're bringing Callum Ilott back to Juncos Hollinger next year. I think he's going to do awesome, a really, really great job. And nonetheless, glad to see that he'll be returning to Juncos Hollinger Racing in the 2024 season, because I think he deserves a return to the team, because he's done an awesome and really great job with the team. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Marcus Armstrong. As it was announced on Thursday morning that Marcus Armstrong has signed a multi-year contract extension with Chip Ganassi Racing and will drive full-time in 2024. If I'm not mistaken, Marcus Armstrong is also expected to have a test at Texas in the next few weeks. Marcus Armstrong, for those who don't know, has been driving pretty much the full season. IndyCar obviously did not run majority of the ovals. Takuma Sato had driven that 11 car, but expected he'll return to the number 11 car in 2024. Marcus Armstrong, I think, is a very, very talented driver. He had a good chance to win an IndyCar race yesterday at Laguna Seca, and I think he'll have a chance to win a couple races next year of how strong Chip Ganassi Racing has been, especially on the road course this year, and with how good Marcus Armstrong has been with him winning the Rookie of the Year honors. I do believe Marcus Armstrong will be an outside championship threat next year. Granted, the IndyCar series is stacked next year. You got a lot of great drivers moving to different places, people moving to different locations. I truly believe Marcus Armstrong, though, is going to win some races next year. I think he'll win a race or two. Obviously, it's going to be tough because you have Alex Palou, who, of course, I think is still going to be a championship contender, who could go back-to-back next year at IndyCar. I think this is a great pickup, though, and very happy, nonetheless, to see that Marcus Armstrong has signed a multi-year contract extension. It was expected this was going to happen, and glad to see that Marcus Armstrong will be returning to Chip Ganassi Racing in the 2024 season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Brad Keselowski. Now, Jordan Bianchi had put out a tweet in regards to talking about how drivers used to not be fans of Kansas Speedway, but then a lot of drivers have come around and love Kansas Speedway now, and he said that Kansas is the best intermediate track. Well, after the Cup race around 9:36, 9:37 Central Standard Time, Brad Keselowski put out a tweet saying that I do agree. The intermediates have become really, really good. He said the next-gen car has made the intermediates a lot better, while the road courses in the short tracks have not been as good. And he calls for that we need more 1.5-mile tracks on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule. While I do agree that we do need a few more mile and a half on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule, I will caution Brad Keselowski by saying this. I don't want to see the schedule overflowed with mile and a half. Right now, I think the NASCAR Cup Series schedule has a very awesome, diverse schedule. You got a lot of road courses. You do have quite a few mile and a half, but you have mile racetracks. You got a couple 2-mile racetracks. You got quite a few short tracks that are different from each other. You got, of course, a couple super speedway tracks and basically a mile and a half that is a super speedway. And of course, you have some other tracks, on the schedule as well, like even a street course. And I think the schedule is very diverse, and I love that. Now, I will say I think a few mile and a halves added to the schedule would not hurt. For me, if we're going to add a couple mile and a halves to the schedule, I take away the Charlotte Roval race and give the Charlotte Oval back. I think the Coke 600 the last years has a really, really good, and the next gen has excelled very, very well at a track like Charlotte. And if we were at another intermediate track, I would obviously bring Chicagoland Speedway back. Chicagoland has not been on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule since 2019, and that was one of the few racetracks that put on great racing with the Gen 6 car and the intermediate tracks back in the day, especially in 2018 and 2019. And that was even during the 550 race, which was a very, very entertaining and great race. So I really hope that we do get to see maybe a couple more mile and a half, but I do agree with most people, let's not overflow the schedule. The next-gen car absolutely needs to be fixed on the short tracks and the road courses. If we can fix that, I think we'd have a perfect balance of great tracks on the schedule. So in my personal opinion, I do agree we need a few more mile and a half, but let's not overflow the schedule, and let's fix the issues with the next-gen car before we go ahead and overflow the schedule with mile and a half once again, because they became cookie cutter tracks back in the 2000s, and we don't want that. And now we're going ahead, Jabon, to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about David Malukas. As it was announced on Thursday morning or Friday afternoon that David Malukas will be joining Aaron McLaren in 2024 on a multi-year contract, I believe driving the number 6 car for the team. Damon Lucas, for the last couple of years, has been driving for Dale Coyne Racing with H&D support. This is an absolute massive pickup for Aaron McLaren. Obviously, Felix Rosenqvist is not returning to the team in 2024 because he is going to be joining Meyer Shank Racing on a multi-year deal. I think Dave Malukas is one of the best up-and-coming talents in IndyCar currently at the moment. And I think if you gave him an opportunity, chance, and great equipment, he could excel. And he's going to get that great chance and opportunity to excel with Aaron McLaren in 2024. He's been really strong in the ovals this year with Dale Coyne Racing the last year. He's obviously almost won the Gateway race last year. And I think that David Malukas is going to be a championship contender. Obviously, he's going to have to go up against guys like Alex Palou, Scott Dixon next year, Pat O'Ward, his teammate, Alexander Rossi. A lot of other drivers throughout the field are going to be really, really strong and competitive. But I certainly think that Dave Malukas is going to be a threat to win races next year. And it wouldn't surprise or shock me if he maybe wins the Indy 500. And guess what? He's going to have Kyle Larson as a teammate in the Indy 500 next year as well, which I think that's really exciting for David Malukas. I think I'm excited for this. I'm glad to see David Malukas is going to be driving for Aaron McLaren. I think he's going to do an awesome and great job with the team. Looking forward for him to have the opportunity and chance to drive for Aaron McLaren in the 2024 season. And now we're going ahead to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jimmie Johnson. Now, we did talk about John Nemechek on Wednesday signing a deal to drive for Legacy Motor Club in 2024, which was expected. But something we didn't talk about is what Jimmie Johnson said on Race Hub. He revealed he will not race again in 2023, but will race in 2024 in select races and hopes to have his schedule announced in the not-so-distant future. Obviously, Jimmie Johnson is not racing the rest of the year. We're not going to get into why, but Jimmie Johnson will at least run some select races in 2024. Let's kind of speculate what races Jimmie could run. Obviously, I think Jimmie Johnson is going to run the 2024 Daytona 500. I would imagine Jimmie Johnson is going to want to run the Chicago Street Course race if it comes back next year. I would imagine Coda's probably going to be on the schedule once again, and probably some other tracks that maybe even get added to the schedule in 2024, maybe like North Wilkesboro. He goes there because obviously a lot of talk in North Wilkesboro is going to be on Easter in 2024. You look what Jimmie Johnson's done for Legacy Motor Club, though. They've been showing a lot more pace and a lot more speed. And it's going to be interesting because Jimmie Johnson, for the first time in his career, is going to be driving a Toyota. Because throughout his NASCAR career, he always drove Chevys. but for the first time next year in 2024, he's going to get to drive a Toyota, which I think is really exciting and really awesome at the same time. But it's going to kind of feel sacrilegious for a lot of Chevy fans because obviously Jimmie Johnson throughout his career always drove Chevys, and now he's going to drive Toyotas in 2024. I find that fascinating. I find that interesting, and nonetheless, crazy to see that Jimmie Johnson is for sure going to be driving a Toyota in 2024. We'll likely find out Jimmie Johnson's schedule in the not-so-distant future, but again, I think his schedule for him and his announcements for him will be coming in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Blaney. Now, for those who don't remember, a couple weeks ago at Daytona, Ryan Blaney suffered a really, really bad crash where he crashed in the outside wall really, really hard. And he said that was the hardest hit of his NASCAR Cup Series career. Now, NASCAR had meetings with all the drivers this past week at Kansas Speedway to discuss their findings, not just from the Ryan Blaney crash, but from the Ryan Preece crash as well. Joe Logano spoke about it, gave some positive comments, but also Ryan Blaney spoke on those comments as well. And he said he had a lot more positive thoughts than negative thoughts in regards to what he saw. And he also said he appreciates what NASCAR's done there, but he also said that the meetings have been less tense than they were a year ago. Remember, about this time a year ago, there was a lot of tense meetings in regards to the safety of the next-gen car. At the time, we had the Kurt Busch crash, and about this time as well, not too far down the road, we then had the Alex Bowman crash. It took Alex Bowman out for pretty much the rest of the year after the Texas wreck, even though Alex Bowman was cleared to come back at Phoenix Raceway. It's good to see meetings have been getting a lot more tense. You want to see that. Obviously, there were a lot of drivers who were scared, and a lot of fans at the time who were scared about the future of the sport. But I'm glad to see the meetings have gone very, very well, and I'm glad to see they're kind of headed in the right direction for the future of the sport, and I'm glad to see those meetings have gone very, very well in general. And I'm glad to see that even some of the crash damage, obviously NASCAR has been working because obviously we've had issues with safety with the next-gen car. I'm glad to see that NASCAR continues to work on that because they do need to continue working on safety because safety is 100% the most important thing. But I'm very glad nonetheless to see that NASCAR continues to work on that part, which of course is the safety of the next-gen car. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Justin Haley. Now, Kaulig Racing, I believe, on Friday afternoon, put out a tweet congratulating Justin Haley on reaching his 100th start in the NASCAR Cup Series with the team. Well, basically his 64th, 65th start with the team. Justin Haley then commented and made a quote tweet and said, "Thanks." Kind of a passive-aggressive comment to Kaulig Racing. Obviously, Justin Haley will not be returning to Kaulig Racing in 2024 and will be joining Rick Ware Racing in 2024. Now, the number that he'll be driving for the team in 2024 has not been disclosed, but I would imagine he'll be either driving the 15 or the 51 car. Probably, in my opinion, the 51 car has kind of been the flagship car for the team this year. I would expect to be driving the 51 car, but it's very interesting because I think Justin Haley did want to return to Kaulig Racing in 2024, but obviously sponsorship funding came into play, and Justin Haley does not have the biggest sponsored funding behind him currently at the moment. Remember, a lot of the races this year that he have had Circle and, of course, Leaf Filter on there, and I think that's not a major shock. It's surprising to kind of let go from the team because of the sponsorship side of things. But I think it's interesting to see that Justin Haley has some very passive-aggressive comments over to the team. It doesn't surprise or shock me, though, because in my opinion, I think he wanted to stay with the team, but sadly, he didn't return to the team, and it's not really a big shock there that he didn't return to the team this year. Hopefully next year, 2024, though, he can have a pretty solid and a really, really great year with Rick Ware Racing. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Watkins Glen. Now, over the last couple weeks, there's been a lot of talk and questions about potentially Watkins Glen hosting a playoff race in 2024. And shout out to Austin Hennessy and Motorsports Wire putting an article out this, but Bob Pockrass went on Sirius and NASCAR Radio earlier in the week, and he says that there has been a lot of talk and conversations about Watkins Glen potentially hosting a points-paying playoff race in 2024. However, a big reason why this has not been finalized for 2024 is because of the camping issue. Because remember, the playoffs, they start in September. A lot of kids are going back to school, and they don't want a lot of kids to be out there in September, especially when they have school more than likely the next day, which is a big reason why. There's obviously been a lot of talk conversations about the Charlotte Roval potentially being let go, bringing the Charlotte Oval back, but they are wanting to have a road course race in the playoffs for NASCAR, as I think having a road course in there creates a lot more diversity for the playoffs. And I do agree having a road course in there would be good, but again, the camping issue does come into play, and that will cause some major issues and some problems if they are to want to host a playoff race in 2024. Weather isn't going to be bad during that time. That's one thing I will know, is that weather won't be as big of an issue because September isn't going to get as much colder, though I will say sometimes it can be a little cooler in September at the time. But to me, in my personal opinion, it doesn't shock me they're having trouble discussing this. I do think there's a chance it does end up happening, but I also think there's a good chance, a possibility, that the race remains where it's at, which is in August. Obviously, a lot of fans didn't like the fact you had two back-to-back road course races next to each other. Of course, you had the Indy road course date, but it does sound like there's a good chance, a possibility, that the Indy road course is going to be gone and the Indy Oval is going to be coming back. We're not sure when the schedule is going to get released. There's been a lot of talk. It could get released in the next 2 weeks. My guess is it's likely going to come out next week. I could be wrong. It could come out this week, but there's a chance it does come out next week. So we'll see what happens in regards to that. Personally, I think a road course being a playoffs would be really, really good, but I understand why NASCAR and the Watkins Glen is having trouble figuring out if they're going to put a road course in the playoffs, because especially Watkins Glen and the camping stuff, they love the camping. A lot of people come out for the camping and stuff, and you may have a diminished amount of people who are coming in for the camping side of things. So that's something that's kind of holding up things currently at the moment when it does come to that schedule. Silly season, I think that's one of the reasons why the schedule has not been released yet. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Chase Elliott versus Kyle Larson. Now, throughout the years, Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson, especially over the last year or two, they've had a little bit of a rivalry. You go back to last year at Auto Club when Kyle Larson fenced Chase Elliott, and then, of course, in Watkins Glen, you go back there where Kyle Larson unintentionally overdrove the corner and ran into Chase Elliott. Well, the rivalry continued once again, but it might have been a little petty because coming to the last pit stop, Kyle Larson ran into Chase Elliott coming off of pit road, and Chase Elliott was very unhappy with Kyle Larson after that incident. Now, obviously, Chase Elliott on the radio showed his displeasure, and then Bob Pockrass had asked Chase Elliott about that, and he said there was no message from Chase Elliott in regards to that, which I find a little interesting, Chase, because you ran Kyle Larson down and ran into him. Now, Kyle Larson also spoke on the situation, and he said that he did not mean to run into Chase Elliott. He said he was trying to avoid Brad Keselowski. When you look at the replay and what happened, Brad Keselowski was coming out, and Kyle Larson was trying to avoid Chase Elliott. Chase Elliott's obviously had a very frustrating 2023 season. Of course, he missed a lot of races, missed the playoffs, had his injury, of course, got suspended for a race because of his aggressiveness and basically his temper a little bit, and then, of course, has not had the greatest year in 2023. And what's a shame is it kind of floundered what was going to be a fantastic finish. Chase on track to finish in the podium position around 3rd or 4th place. Obviously, did drop back to 6th position because Larson beat him off of pit road. Again, I don't think Kyle Larson intentionally ran into Chase Elliott. I think that was just a little bit of a mistake by Kyle Larson. But I feel like maybe Chase overreacted just a little bit. But again, I'm not surprised that Chase Elliott was a little bit upset about that move. It doesn't surprise or shock me in the slightest that ended up happening, because Chase Elliott has had a very frustrating year in 2023, and both drivers have had a lot of tension in the past. So again, not surprised or shocked about it in the slightest. I really hope that they can figure it out and maybe kind of calm themselves down, because both of them, Larson, of course, is competing for a NASCAR Cup Series championship this series, trying to win his second championship, I should say, and trying to win races. Larson's been up for a lot more this year, and I think Larson has been one of the championship contenders all year long. And Chase Elliott fans, you'll get a chance next year. You'll have an opportunity and shot. I feel like Chase Elliott maybe overreacted just a little bit running into Kyle Larson, but I understand why Chase has been frustrated, because it has not been a good year for Chase Elliott throughout 2023. Again, though, I think Chase Elliott will come back stronger and run a lot better in the 2024 season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. Now, earlier in the week, Denny Hamlin has signed a multi-year contract extension with Joe Gibbs Racing. And also has announced that 23XI Racing has signed their extension with Toyota, meaning that Bubba Wallace and Tyler Reddick will remain as Toyota drivers, and Michael Jordan will stay in the Toyota family, and also Kurt Busch will stay in the Toyota family as well, because I remember having a lot of conversations about 23XI Racing potentially heading to Ford in 2024, but obviously that is not going to end up happening. Well, Denny Hamlin spoke to the media in regards to questions being asked about the contract, and Denny Hamlin says he wouldn't rule out doing another deal to continue driving for JGR beyond the time of the deal he had just signed. Now, Denny Hamlin did not reveal how long his contract was. My best guess when it comes to the Denny Hamlin contract extension, it's probably a 2 to 3 year extension, which I think probably goes through 2025 or 2026. My guess is more than likely 2026. And by the end of 2026, Denny Hamlin will be, at the end of that year, 46 years old. My guess is Denny Hamlin probably has about 4 or 5 years left of his career at most. I don't see Denny Hamlin going around insane much longer. Obviously, a lot of drivers are going a little bit later. And Denny Hamlin will be 43 at the end of this year. Turns 43 on November 18th, so about 2 months from now. And Denny Hamlin, I feel like eventually is going to start falling off as a driver when it comes to performance on the racetrack. So it is going to be interesting to see how Denny Hamlin does decide to race in the NASCAR Cup Series. My guess is last year is going to be like 2027 or 2028, which by the end of 2028, he'll be 48 years old. But it's really good that they get to keep Denny Hamlin around at least for the next 2 years. I think it's really huge for the team because Joe Gibbs Racing, it will help out drivers like Christopher Bell and, of course, Ty Gibbs. Christopher Bell will be a little bit older when Denny retires. And then, of course, Ty Gibbs, having an older driver sticking around is really going to help Ty Gibbs out in the long term. And having that veteran presence, keeping the team stable for next year is great. Now, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with Martin Truex Jr. past 2024. I'm thinking Martin Truex Jr. probably will run his last year in 2024. But if it goes like this year, maybe comes back for 2025. I think it's going to be kind of a wait-and-see game what happens in regards to the 2025 season. But nonetheless, I think it's good that Denny Hamlin's going to return. Do I think he goes back 2025, 2026? We'll have to wait and see because a lot of drivers are retiring in their mid to late 40s now. But I can see Denny Hamlin going a lot longer. He's competitive. He's got 50 career Cup Series wins at this point, and I think he does want to win more than 50 races. He would probably like to win maybe 60 to 65 races, and of course, probably wants to win a championship before he retires because he still is looking for his first NASCAR Cup Series championship. And trust me, he probably wants to win that first NASCAR Cup Series championship before he ends up retiring. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Truex. Now, there's been a lot of talk and questions about his future for 2024 for Ryan Truex. We do know at this point that Ryan Truex will be driving for Joe Gibbs Racing, at least on a part-time basis, in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. But Ryan Truex has been looking for sponsors. Well, on Thursday, SkewCar, a fellow YouTuber here on YouTube, put out a tweet regarding who do you think replaces John Hunter Nemechek in the 20 car in 2024? Well, Ryan Truex put out a quote sheet with a thinking emoji indicating that he could potentially be driving full-time for Joe Gibbs Racing's Xfinity Series team in 2024. Ryan Truex here drove part-time for Joe Gibbs Racing in the number 19 car and scored a victory for the team at Dover. And in all the races, he ran up front and contended for top 5s and top 10s. I personally think Ryan Truex deserves a full-time opportunity and chance to race in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. I think he's done amazing and a really, really great job with the team this year. And I think he will do a great job with the team in 2024 if he goes full-time. And if you put him full-time next year, I think he will absolutely be a championship threat and a championship contender. And I think he'll win a couple races next year. Obviously, if he works with Ben Bayshore, we're not sure if Ben Bayshore is going to be sticking around in the Xfinity Series or moving up to work with John Hunter next year because we're not sure what's going on with Luke Lambert for the team next year with the 42. Obviously, we know that John Hunter's going full-time Cup racing next year. But I think Ryan Truex will do a great job regardless of who he works with. Maybe goes to the 19 car and drives that 19 and works with Jason Ratcliffe. Or maybe goes to the 18 because we're not sure what's going on with Sammy Smith next year. If I had to guess currently at the moment, I think Ryan Truex will be full-time. And I think Ryan Truex deserves an opportunity to run full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. I think he's done a great job with the team. I think he's performed very, very well. And I think he's done an awesome and great job with the organization. Now, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the rest of JGR lineup. I would think Sammy Smith is coming back to Joe Gibbs Racing next year in 2024. We're not sure, though, what's going on with the other two cars. Trevor Bayne's in the running. From what I understand, he's in the running, potentially run full-time Xfinity in 2024. And Trevor Bayne had a pretty impressive first race back a couple weeks ago at Daytona, though he kind of caused a big wreck. But there's also a lot of talk that he, of course, is going to run Bristol later this week. And I think that Trevor Bayne is going to be a contender at Bristol. And then, of course, you do have Matt DiBenedetto's been rumored to maybe be in the conversations. We're going to talk about Matt DiBenedetto here in just a little bit in regards to his future. There's a lot of drivers in the running. Also, Corey Heim potentially could be in the running for a full-time Xfinity ride with JGR. And Corey, I think, has some spots of funny, but obviously Corey does have a little bit of beef, I believe, with Joe Gibbs Racing. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens to JGR's Xfinity lineup. But I would imagine Ryan Truex is 1,000% in the running and conversations and potentially get a full-time ride with the team. And honestly, if he goes full-time with JGR, I think he's going to do a very awesome and really good job with the organization. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jimmie Johnson once again. Now, Jimmie Johnson spoke on a lot of different topics in regards to the future of the team, spoke on his family is moving out to England, but there's one thing he spoke on, and he spoke on Noah Gragson. Now, obviously, we know that John Nemechek will be driving a 42 car for Legacy Motor Club in the 2024 season, replacing Noah Gragson. Now, originally, Noah Gragson had a 2-year deal with Legacy Motor Club. With Legacy Motor Club switching to Toyota wanted him out, and then Noah Gragson had his issues. Well, Jimmie Johnson, who is a co-owner of Legacy Motor Club, spoke on Noah Gragson on a podcast and also spoke to the Associated Press. He says he's 100%, Noah Gragson 100% resigned from the team, and it surprised us because that's not what we anticipated. Jimmie says he speaks to Noah Gragson every day, and he's on the path to NASCAR's reinstatement process. I do believe what Jimmie John's saying. I do believe that Noah Gragson was basically Noah Gragson decided himself to go to Jimmie Johnson and the owners of Legacy Motor Club and basically decided to say, you know what, I want to leave the team because of all the stuff that happened. Obviously, Noah Gragson had liked a meme on social media and got suspended indefinitely by NASCAR. Now, I will agree that maybe it's a team's decision. I feel like NASCAR maybe jumped the gun just a little bit on finding a way to suspend Noah Gragson there, and maybe they should not have suspended Noah Gragson indefinitely. Maybe at worst, maybe a one-race suspension, but that is it. And the team want to do it, that is on the team, that is not on NASCAR. But I feel like NASCAR jumped the gun there. Now, they should have also Noah Gragson that maybe he shouldn't have to go through a reinstatement process. Maybe all she should have had to do was go through sensitive training. Kind of similar to what I think Denny Hamlin had to do. Maybe that they should have done that. But I think Noah Gragson will come back in this sport in the future. Now, the big question revolves around Jimmie Johnson's comments. I do agree with Jimmie Johnson. I think that it's good to see that Jimmie and Noah are having good communication and they're not on bad terms. Now, let's talk about the future Noah Gragson. Obviously, I'm making a video talking about it tomorrow, but where I think Noah Gragson is going to end up, because I think Noah Gragson will get reinstated back into sport in the not-so-distant future. So what happens to Noah Gragson? Well, I think there's a lot of opportunities for Noah Gragson. There's a chance he could be in the 31 car next year. There's a chance he could maybe be in the 25 for Rack. There's been rumors circulating about that. Floor Sport Racing hasn't mentioned as a team. It's a potential rumor team we've been hearing. There's a lot of teams that Noah Gragson, including Junior Motorsports, that he could end up going to in the 2024 calendar year. But I'm glad to see, like I said, Jimmy's having good talks with Noah Gragson, and I'm glad to see they're on good terms. Again, obviously, I think a lot of people think there were bad terms, but I don't think Jimmie Johnson was one-man decision in regards to Toyota. Toyota is not a big fan of Noah Gragson historically, and I think they're finding any excuse. Toyota, I think, was finding any excuse to get rid of Noah Gragson. Obviously, there's a lot of fishy stuff that happened behind the scenes in regards to that. I really hope Noah Gragson does come back in the future. And I'm glad nonetheless see, though, that there's a lot of good stuff happening between both of them, and they're not on bad terms. Talking about Jimmie Johnson and Noah Gragson, glad to see that they're not on bad terms. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Stewart-Haas Racing and the number 10 car once again. Now, we have talked about the 10 car and Stewart-Haas Racing a lot on this channel because a lot of talk about who potentially could be driving a 10 car in 2024. Why is there a lot of conversation about that? Well, a big reason is because it's been reported many, many times throughout the year that Aric Almirola is likely going to retire at the end of the 2023 season. Remember, Aric Almirola was supposed to retire at the end of the 2022 season. It was announced my birthday in 2022 that he was going to retire at the end of 2022. But Aric Almirola made the decision that Smithfield wanted Aric Almirola to come back in 2023. Now remember, Aric Almirola did sign a multi-year contract extension with Stewart-Haas Racing, but contracts can easily be broken very, very early. And many in the industry expect that Aric Almirola is going to retire. So a big question revolves around who is going to drive that 10 car because they're likely going to need sponsorship funding because it's expected that Smithfield is going to leave Stewart-Haas Racing if Aric Almirola is to retire at the end of the season. Now, there have been a lot of drivers have been in rumors and rumbles, but there's been another thing to talk about is there's a potential chance that Stewart-Haas Racing could also downsize at the end of 2023, though they do have a contract of 4 through 2024, which they are required to have 4 cars through that contract, but they could easily break that contract and downsize the 2 teams. We know for sure that Josh Berry is going to be in the 4, and Chase Briscoe is going to be in the 14 car next year in 2024. Ryan Preece is close signing an extension with Stewart-Haas Racing, but that contract has also not been finalized, and both the 41 and the 10 could end up leaving at the end of the year, and those charters could be sold to a team like RFK perhaps, and that's where a driver like Zane Smith could go to. But the 10 and 41 remain. I would expect that Ryan Preece is going to stay in the 41. Let's talk about the 10 car. There's a lot of drivers that could end up in the 10 car. You've got Zane Smith. Zane Smith is absolutely the front runner for the 10 car currently at the moment. Zane Smith is a very, very good driver. He's been really good in the Truck Series. He's made a couple Cup starts this year. And I think Zane Smith would do a very good job in the 10 car next year. I think he would do better than Eric Almirola's done this year. No disrespect to Eric Almirola. I don't think Eric Almirola's a bad driver. If he got competent equipment, he'd probably be a lot more competitive. And did get a top 20 finish, to be fair, at Kansas, and which is surprising for how much struggle Stewart-Haas Racing has had over the last few years. But Zane Smith would be a great pick for there. You've also got Cole Custer, and Bob Pockett's mentioned in the article that I'm reacting to that Cole Custer's in the running for the 10 car as well. Cole Custer, of course, the son of Joe Custer, is the president of Stewart-Haas Racing. Cole Custer's had a great year in Xfinity, and I think Cole wants to go back Cup racing, though I don't think he's the favorite, but there's a chance he could end up in the 10 car. You've also got Riley Herbst. Riley Herbst's future is kind of in question a little bit as well, what he's going to be doing next year in 2024. There's a chance he could be in Xfinity once again full-time, but there's also a chance he could be Cup racing. There's other wild drivers rumored. Harrison Burton at one point, but Harrison Burton obviously is likely returning to the Wood Brothers in 2024. I've seen people mention even Haley Deegan could be going Cup racing next year, and I think there's no chance of possibly that's happening. There's a chance she'll be moving up to the Xfinity Series in 2024, but likely she will not be joining. I've seen people even mention other drivers like Matt DiBenedetto and other wild drivers who could have a chance, but I don't think that we're going to see Matt DiBenedetto even close to Stewart-Haas Racing because they're going to need sponsorship and funding. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in regards to takes 10 car. If Eric Almirola does truly end up retiring though in 2023, I think the Zane Smith will take the 10. I think Cole's in the running, but if I had to guess right now who's going to be driving that 10 car next year, I think it's going to be Zane Smith. Zane Smith wants to be Cup racing in 2024. And I think he deserves a 10 car next year. Ford wants to keep him in the family. I think that contract got bought out, so he can go to another team maybe in 2024 perhaps. But I think Zane Smith right now is absolutely the favorite to take over the 10 car in 2024 if we see Eric Almirola retire. So we'll see what happens in regards to that. But it sounds like at this point, Zane Smith is the front runner and the favorite for sure to take over the 10 car in the 2024 NASCAR Cup Series season. And now we're going to jump onto the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Matt DiBenedetto. Now, about a week or two ago, it was announced that Matt DiBenedetto would not be returning to Rackley WAR Racing in the 2024 season. Matt DiBenedetto had been driving for Rackley WAR the last couple years, scored a win with the team at Talladega in 2022, and it made the playoffs with the team in 2023 before inevitably, unfortunately, getting eliminated in the round of 10, though he gave a run and a shot and only missed out by 5 points in making the round of 8, which is really impressive for the standards of Rackley WAR Racing. Now, before the Truck Series race happened at Kansas, though, Matt DiBenedetto was on the morning drive with SiriusXM NASCAR Radio, and he is still unsure on 2024 plans. He says, I'm not totally sure what I am going to be doing in the 2024 season, but he is open to anything in regards to 2024. Now, Matt DiBenedetto, a lot of people feel like he needs sponsorship funding to get a ride for 2024. But guys, he is a very, very talented driver. I've seen people saying he shouldn't have a ride going next year, but Matt DiBenedetto has done a very good job in the equipment he's been in. Look what he's done with Rackley this year. Matt DiBenedetto got them to the playoffs, almost won a couple races this year, had a chance to win Kansas, got a third-place finish in North Wilkesboro, and was only 5 points in making it to round of 8, which only a few years ago this team started, and this team was struggling in 2021. Over the last few years, they've been building something, and I think a big reason why they've been getting better is because of the driver, that being Matt DiBenedetto. Some people believe he was let go because of Curtis Sutton's son, Dawson Sutton, but I feel like Dawson, I'm not sure how I feel he would do with Rackley. But we'll talk about now Matt DiBenedetto because I think he's done a great job with that team. Remember, just a few years ago, he drove for the Wood Brothers and did an amazing and great job with that team, got into playoffs in 2020, and then, of course, in 2021, finished 18th in the standings. Look at Harrison Burton's done in that car since. Harrison Burton has struggled. So I think that Matt DiBenedetto is a better driver than Harrison Burton. Now, let's talk about where Matt DiBenedetto could end up driving in 2024 because there's a lot of speculation to talk about where he's going to go. Because I think Matt DiBenedetto will be in the sport in 2024. Let's talk about cup options. I think there's only 1 or 2 cup options available. You have the 31 car for Kaulig Racing that could be open next year for him. Obviously, we'll talk about them in a little bit. I think he deserves another cup opportunity in my personal opinion, but I think the 31 could be reserved for other drivers, but definitely Kaulig Racing is an option for Matt DiBenedetto for the 2024 season. You also have some Xfinity Series options that could be available. I'll mention Junior Motorsports. Junior Motorsports in the 8 car is still available for 2024. Matt DiBenedetto does need sponsors and funding to go to that ride, but I think Matt DiBenedetto, if he goes to the 8 car and drives for Junior Motorsports next year, I do believe that Matt DiBenedetto would be an outside championship contender, and I think he would win races. We've seen Junior Motorsports improve this year, and I think he would do a great job with Junior Motorsports. So I think that is a great option if it does end up becoming available. You also have Spire Motorsports Xfinity Series program. Spire Motorsports has sponsorship funding ready to go for that 77 car in Xfinity next year, and I would imagine Matt DiBenedetto would be someone that you have to keep your eyes out on for that 77 car, and I think he'd do a really good job in Xfinity with that team. They have Junior Motorsports support and would be competitive with that team. You've also got a couple other driver team cars in the truck series that could be available. You have potentially the 42 truck for Nice Motorsports. Nice Motorsports expecting to make a decision. Obviously, Carson Hocebar, it was unclear what he's going to be doing next year. Sounds more than likely to be in the Cup Series with Spire Motorsports number 77 car, and that could open up the 42 truck for Nice Motorsports next year. But also Shane Van Gisbergen is in the running for that 42 truck for next year as well, as Shane is expected to sign a development deal with Trackhouse Racing, which guess who's part of that development deal? Nice Motorsports. Nice Motorsports part of the Trackhouse family because Justin Marks has been driven for the team in the past and multiple drivers there. Kaulig Racing's Xfinity program could also be an option for Matt DiBenedetto, and I think he'd do a great job with that team. We're going to talk about Daniel Hemrick here in a little bit in regards to where I think he could end up next year, but I do believe Matt DiBenedetto will find a ride. I think Matt DiBenedetto 1000% deserves an opportunity chance to be in a really, really great car, and I really hope he gets a chance and opportunity. I know people have their feelings about Matt DiBenedetto, and I understand people not liking Matt DiBenedetto. It's understandable, but Matt DiBenedetto, guys, I know what happened 2 years ago. He did the Let's Go Brandon stuff, and that was controversial, and I condemned him for that. I thought that was a stupid move. But the guy really hasn't done much the last few years. He shows emotion. Everyone goes after him, and the guy has excelled in equipment when it's not been the best. If he gets a good car, because he really has never had a top-tier car, as people say the Woodburn is a top-tier car, and the Woodburns have proven they're not a top-tier car. Matt DiBenedetto has never been in top-tier equipment. And I also mentioned Joe Gibbs Racing, too, for a second, because JGR is a team that could see him going to next year. He's been rumored. He's a former Joe Gibbs Racing driver. If he goes there, he would do great. But I'm not sure he's going to end up there. But going back to talk about his future, I really hope they give him an opportunity chance to drive with a good team next year. I think he deserves a full-time opportunity maybe in the Cup Series, but I think it's going to be tough to go to. I think he ends up in Xfinity or trucks again next year, though, but I think he will potentially get a good car with how well he has performed with Brackley. I think teams are going to look at that, and I think he'll get a chance to drive for a good team in the 2024 season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Kaulig Racing. Now, there's been a lot of speculation in regards to what is going on with Kaulig Racing for 2024 because both the 16 and the 31 cars could be available for 2024. Obviously, AJ Allmendinger has not made a decision for 2024 yet. He could be back in the Cup Series next year, but there's also a chance he could be in Xfinity Series full-time in 2024. And the 31 car is wide open with Justin Haley leaving Kaulig at the end of this year and headed to Rick Ware Racing. Well, Chris Rice had an interview with Brian Nolan from Front Stretch, and he says that they are close to announcing their 2024 plans. And they are expected to potentially make their announcement at Bristol later this week. There's been a lot of speculation in regards on who is going to be driving those respective cars. Let's first talk about the 16 car because a couple drivers have been running for the 16 car. Obviously, like I mentioned a second ago, AJ Allmendinger could potentially be headed back to the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2024, but also there's a chance that he could be driving in the Cup Series in the 16 once again in 2024. If you were to ask me currently at the moment what I think happens to AJ Allmendinger, I think AJ Allmendinger could be back in Xfinity full-time. I think he's got a family, obviously, now he's taken care of, and I think he wants to be a little more focused on that. And AJ Allmendinger is now in his 40s, and he's a Cup-caliber driver. I sort of think he would do much better in Xfinity, and let's be honest, he's probably had a lot more fun in Xfinity than he's had in Cup. So who would take the ride for the 16? Well, the two frontrunners for the 16, according to reports, are Ty Dillon and Daniel Hemrick. We saw Bob Pockrass interview Daniel Hemrick, and he's in a mix for the 16 car currently at the moment. Daniel Hemrick has done a decent job with the team, obviously driving a 10 car for the rest of the year for Kaulig. So I think that's a huge indication he can end up in the 16 car next year and has driven a 16 for Kaulig and Cup. He wouldn't be the worst option, but wouldn't be the best option. And then there's Ty Dillon. Like I mentioned earlier, Carson Ospar is heavily rumored to potentially be headed to 77 for Spire. They've got sponsorship funding lined up there for Gamebridge, and Carson doesn't bring a lot of sponsors from what I understand, so Carson would do great with a 77. Ty Dillon's room for 16. Ty Dillon, in my personal opinion, would not do a great job driving for Kaulig. I think he would struggle, and they would be stagnating if you put him in that ride, but he's definitely in the front running for that number 16 car next year. But now there's also questions about the 31 car, because this one, they said, is going to surprise a lot of people. There is a chance that maybe Ty Dillon and Daniel Hemrick could also drive this car in 2024. But there have been a lot of drivers have been potentially rumored for the 31 car. There's like 4 or 5 guys that have been rumored. First, you have Noah Gragson. Noah Gragson obviously needs to be cleared by NASCAR and needs to be reinstated back into the sport before he even gets to ride in NASCAR. He's run for a lot of different teams, but this ride has been kind of talked about, and this is going to be a potential possibility. The 31 car has been a very, very strong car in the past. We've seen Justin Elliott have good runs, and Noah Gragson, of course, has driven for Kaulig Racing before. So this could be a potential opportunity for Noah Gragson, but I don't think he's a favorite for this ride just yet, but I think this would be a great opportunity for Noah Gragson if he ended up driving this car. Then you have Justin Allgaier. Justin Allgaier has been rumored for the 31 car. There's been people speculating, some believe he could be headed to Kaulig Racing next year, whether it's Xfinity or Cup. He's been driving for Junior Motorsports 2016 and has been championship threat pretty much every single year, year in and year out, been winning races with the team. I think there's a good chance he could be here next year. He's got sponsorship with Brandt, and they're looking for someone with sponsored funding. Justin Allgaier does provide that. And then you have Matt DiBenedetto. I talked about Matt DiBenedetto here just a little bit ago, but Matt DiBenedetto, I think, would do a solid job with the team. Yes, looking for sponsorship funding, but I think maybe Matt could bring some with the team. Who knows at this point? But Matt DiBenedetto, I think, deserves another Cup opportunity, and I think he'd do a really good job with the team. There's been other drivers that people have been speculating. Shane Van Gisbergen has been rumored for maybe the 31 car, and people have been speculating that. But Shane Van Gisbergen, like I already mentioned, with the knee stuff, when we talk about Matt DiBenedetto, he's been rumored to potentially have a development deal with Trackhouse Racing, drive part-time in Cup, drive part-time in Xfinity, which I think he'll drive for Kaulig Racing part-time in the Xfinity Series because we've seen Trackhouse drivers drive for Kaulig Racing. But I think he also drive part-time for Nice Motorsports and Trucks, maybe full-time in Trucks perhaps. But I think he's going to be doing a development deal with Trackhouse. And then, of course, there's other drivers. I've heard even Carl Edwards been mentioned. But Carl Edwards, if he does make a start in NASCAR once again, I think it is going to be with 2311 Racing. I've also seen people mention Carson Ospar and Zane Smith. Zane Smith, I think, is going to stay in the Ford family. And I think Carson's going to be driving a 77 car for Spire Motorsports next year. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the 31 car. If I had to guess when it comes to 16 to 31, I'm going to give the ride to Daniel Hemrick for the 16. I think Ty Dillon has a chance to go to 31 next year, but I do think that it's up for grabs. I think it's going to be very interesting to see who ends up in the 31 car next year for Kaulig, and I think there's going to be a lot of speculation in regards who ends up driving what cars next year for 2024, but I think Kaulig Racing is going to make it interesting. I really hope it's someone good, though. If I had to personally pick, I would go between Noah Gragson and Matt DiBenedetto. For me personally, Noah Gragson is a very, very good driver. And, of course, Matt DiBenedetto. Because I know people say, well, Carson Ospar has been better than Noah. And I think that's true in a few starts. We've seen Carson do better than what Noah had done in that car. But Carson Ospar, I think, is like a legend, and it's going to be someone who's going to be a legend in the sport and has a chance to win a lot of Cup races maybe in the future. Noah Gragson, I don't think he's going to win a lot of races, but if you give him good opportunity and good equipment, he's going to do great. Remember, just a few years ago, Noah Gragson in Xfinity literally won 9 races and made the championship 4. You don't do that if you're not a good driver. Noah Gragson, I think, deserves a chance in a good equipment. So we'll see who gets to ride in 2024 when it comes to Kaulig Racing. But there's a lot of speculation about that, and I think it's wide open currently at the moment who's going to get those rides. So that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, thus go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links in the description below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's video. Who do you think drives 16 to 31 cars for Kaulig Racing in 2024? Let me know your thoughts in comments below. And where do you think Matt DiBenedetto ends up in 2024? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, we have the NASCAR Truck Series race picks for Bristol, where they're going to be starting their round of 8 of the playoffs. Then tomorrow, we'll be having 2 videos on the channel. We'll be talking about Noah Gragson, speculating where he could end up going. And then, of course, we are going to have the Xfinity Series race picks for Bristol as well. Then on Wednesday, we'll have a NASCAR news video on the channel. And then on Thursday, of course, we are going to have the race picks for the Cup Series race at Bristol, along with the Truck Series race review for Bristol as well. Got a lot of great content dropping in the channel, and I cannot wait to share it with you all. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.